scorched claws clamped around my neck, its fiery red eyes screaming for help. Paralyzed, I stared, unable to believe what had just happened right in front of me. This creature, desperately seeking help, from me, from all of us, was the very same being we nearly killed in front of a raucous cheering crowd.
Mark!
I froze. Houston, July 19th, 2007. It was the kind of day where the air felt like it was giving you a sticky hug. Heat stroke was our usual rodeo, not a riot, at a church. That call, crackling over the ambulance radio, felt like a bad punchline. In this weather, you expect dehydration drips and fainting grannies. But a riot, especially in front of a church, that's when you know something's not right, by a long shot. The police were already on site, multiple units, of course. As for us medics, stand by. In this heat, a riot could escalate in an instant. We headed for West Ward, not the best part of town, though that's part of the reason it piqued my interest. It was St. Michael's Cathedral, of all places. The church had seen its last mass years ago, ravaged by a fire in the late 80s, leaving behind only ruins and a whirlwind of rumors. Officially, it was blamed on a gas leak, but there were whispers of pastors with jerry cans and Mormon arsonists. The conspiracy theorists loved it. Some even called it divine intervention, a fiery purge for a city drowning in sin. Over 2 decades later, the question of its future still lingered: reconstruction or demolition. The elite showed little urgency, as usual, because it wasn't in their backyard. Ultimately, the building remained like a rotten tooth, simply serving the purpose of looming over a neighborhood. Are those torches? Amanda, my partner for the shift, asked as we parked a safe distance from the cathedral. They sure look like it, I replied. The heat shimmered off the asphalt, distorting the sight of St. Michael's even further. We spotted the scene long before the sirens died down. A thick knot of bodies pulsed in the haze, a dark stain against the pale July sky. This crowd was different, their faces illuminated by flickering torches as they clutched wooden stakes, evoking a haunting throwback to darker times. They weren't just protesting. They were trying to break in. There's talk about a vampire hiding in there. My partner from the other ambulance blurted out, his voice tight. I snorted, the sound echoing a little too harshly in the cramped ambulance bay. Oh, really? How cute. You do know that in vampire lore, we're usually the first ones sucked dry, right? A flicker of something crossed his face, a mix of annoyance and maybe a hint of fear. Hard to tell under the grime of a long shift. St. Michael's had been a haven for the city's underbelly for years. Ever since the fire, the boarded-up windows had become a haunting reminder of the tragedy, providing easy access for those who preferred the shadows. Local residents, tired of the nocturnal symphony of coughs and crashes coming from the ruined building, bricked up the entrances. But drifters and addicts still managed to slip in. Exhausted from years of needles and petty thefts, residents turned to the last solution they could control, setting up a watch. A ragtag group patrolled the area, armed with nothing but flashlights. Though their efforts worked for a while, whispers began to spread. A child, eyes wide with a story that seemed straight out of bedtime tales, claimed to have seen a figure flitting between the boarded-up windows. a tall, gaunt figure with eyes that glowed red in the moonlight. The first sighting was dismissed as a child's fantasy, but whispers have a way of multiplying and evolving with each retelling. Soon, multiple accounts surfaced, each adding its own detail. A flicker of movement, a guttural moan echoing from within the silent building. Rumor has it that someone was filmed on the roof during a full moon, loudly proclaiming himself a vampire, because why not? Despite numerous reports, the police didn't take the case seriously. At the time, shaky cell phone footage was still new and not yet considered reliable evidence. And, as often occurs in such situations, waning trust in official channels led whispers to evolve into action. The neighborhood watch, fueled by a potent mix of fear and frustration, decided to take matters into their own hands. Then, suddenly, bang! A crack of gunfire echoed through the already tense air. It wasn't the controlled pop of a firing range, but a desperate, unpredictable warning shot. A police officer at the forefront of the crowd held his smoking service weapon aimed into the air and shouted through gritted teeth, "Everyone step back now!" A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Panic and anger flickered in their eyes. But for once, the gamble paid off. The mob, momentarily stunned, shuffled back. A tide receding from the makeshift barricade of bricks they had assaulted moments ago. 50 pairs of eyes, some furious, some apprehensive, locked on the officers, now forming a human shield. Shouts erupted from the crowd, a cacophony of defiance and frustration. "Kill that bloodsucker! Give him to us! Drag him out here!" An officer, a woman with a strong jaw and a weary gaze, stepped forward, a bullhorn replacing the intimidation of the firearm. "We understand your concern, folks," her voice boomed, cutting through the clamor. "But this is a dangerous situation. Let the professionals handle it. You'll get answers today." The crowd grumbled, their anger simmering beneath the threat of arrest. The police, swift and efficient, unfurled yellow tape, creating a perimeter that pushed the throng back further. This wasn't a Hollywood spectacle. These officers weren't SWAT. They were tired, underpaid, and facing a mob fueled by superstition and grief. A vampire. One of those mythical creatures that lurks in the shadows and feasts on blood. No wonder the crowd came armed with torches and wooden stakes. As a medic, folklore wasn't exactly in my wheelhouse. But even I knew from bedtime stories that vampires and religious symbols like crosses don't mix. So for me, it was clear as day. Whatever was inside, it definitely wasn't a vampire. A small, determined group of officers assembled, their faces etched with concern. The two of us, Amanda and I, remained at a safe distance, our medical supplies prepped, a silent promise of aid against the unknown. The officers, flashlights cutting through the growing darkness, approached the breached entrance of the cathedral. Back to back they moved as one, their forms receding into the gaping maw of the church, swallowed by the shadows. I couldn't help but pass a tired smirk, watching them take on the age-old legends of the night, while at the same time contemplating just how much of an influence even an absurd rumor or bluff can make, if loud enough. A tense silence descended, broken only by the rasping breaths of the crowd. Curiosity and fear warred on their faces, a suffocating pressure. My gaze drifted from the shadowed doorway to the imposing structure itself. This wasn't just a burned-out husk. It was a monument to a tragedy, its Gothic facade etched with the passage of time and the scars of fire. Cryptic symbols peeked from beneath layers of soot, and the shattered rose window, an empty eye staring sightlessly back, seemed to echo the unanswered questions that hung in the air. Then, a heavy thud, a sickening sound that resonated through the bone. A moment later, a guttural scream pierced the silence, a single word cutting through the tension. "Medic!" A police officer at the entrance urgently waved us in. "We could use some medical assistance here," he called. Inside the vast emptiness of the cathedral felt like a living thing, a cavernous maw swallowing the faint light that dared to pierce the dusty rose windows. Skeletal shadows danced across the debris-strewn floor, the remnants of pews and fallen plaster forming a graveyard of past grandeur. The once grand staircase, a skeletal rib cage leading nowhere, had collapsed into a tangled mess of rubble. The shattered remnants of the marble altar mirrored the desecration of the walls, the wooden crosses ripped away like scabs from a festering wound. The air held a suffocating cocktail of burnt wood, damp earth, and a metallic tang. My stomach lurched at the sight of the first disturbance. What initially appeared to be a single bloated rat turned into a gruesome tableau upon closer inspection. A macabre pile of decapitated rodents lay splayed like discarded toys. Their lifeless bodies, drained of blood, looked like wrinkled dishcloths tossed aside by an unseen hand. A morbid curiosity warred with a rising tide of nausea as I scanned further. "That's not all," a gruff voice cut through the oppressive silence. A stocky police officer stood beside me, his flashlight beam revealing a chilling inscription sprawled across the blackened stone. "The sun is a traitor." "We've seen this message at least 20 times, he muttered. "Same words, all over the damn place." Before we could fully comprehend the weight of his words, a deafening scream tore through the cathedral. "Stay back, creep!" The sound ricocheted off the ancient walls, echoing and distorting until it became an unrecognizable chorus of whispers. We all instinctively whipped our heads upwards, following the officer's panicked gaze. Perched atop a grotesque gargoyle, a creature of shadow and malice, loomed a figure cloaked in darkness. The faint light filtering through a shattered window bathed it in an eerie glow, turning it into a sinister silhouette against the vibrantly colored stained glass. It had a humanoid shape, yet the extended limbs and the way its head was angled seemed disturbingly wrong, stirring a deep, instinctive fear within me. What the actual? A heavy silence descended, broken only by the ragged gasps of the officers around me. The figure tilted its head, an unsettling movement in the absence of any visible neck. Its unseen eyes, or perhaps something else entirely, seemed to lock on to each of us in turn. Then, with deliberate slowness, it began to move. Its gestures were jerky, almost marionette-like, the fluidity of human motion replaced by a series of unsettling twitches and contortions. It muttered cryptic verses, like a dark preacher warning of the sinister side of the sun and light. "And that, right there, that's exactly why you're here. Tell us what on earth that is," the officer demanded, desperation in the eyes of everyone around us. "Why does it look so inhuman?" Amanda asked, her voice filled with unease as she shot me a worried glance. "Mark, could that really be a vampire?" I forced a humorless chuckle, the sound brittle in the tense silence. "Vampires? Come on, guys, get a grip. We don't have time for fairy tales." But my attempt at bravado rang hollow. And even I started to wonder if there might be more to the world than I had originally believed. Our flashlights cut through the darkness, briefly catching the figure perched on the gargoyle. It recoiled with a hiss, its ragged black robes barely concealing its disturbing form. The creature was vaguely humanoid, but unnaturally tall and thin, and it moved with impossible agility. As we raised our beams, it darted along the rafters, a shadowy blur amid the bats bursting from their roost. Shit, I thought as a cold dread coiled within me. Extinguish the light. It mocks the divine, it shrieked, its voice a distorted parody of human speech. Snuff out these infernal torches that sear my righteous flesh. Amanda, ever the pragmatist, made a snap decision. Turn off the lights, she ordered, her voice surprisingly steady. It was a bold move. The creature's aversion to our beams made me wonder if it was sensitive to light, as a nocturnal being might be. Amanda's choice might give us a chance to disorient the creature and find a way to communicate. The cathedral sank into darkness. The creature's shrieks echoed around us, a mix of terror and vulnerability. Meanwhile, the officers had formulated a plan. Two of them moved quietly to flank the gargoyle. I felt a primal urge to intervene, my heart pounding against my ribs. Easy there, buddy, I called out. We just want to talk. There's no need for these death-defying stunts. My words sounded thin and weak. The creature didn't respond, only half visible as it tried to hide behind a Gothic arch high in the sky, its form obscured by shadows from the stained glass and holes in the roof. Silence stretched, broken only by the rasping breaths of the officers as they closed in. Hope flickered in my chest. Maybe, just maybe, we could de-escalate the situation before the police resorted to violent intervention, which I sensed drawing nearer from the corner of my eye. Then, a sudden crack shattered the fragile calm. One of the officers had stepped on a loose piece of rubble. The sound reverberated like thunder in the oppressive silence. The creature's shrieks grew louder. It whipped its head around, its unseen eyes frantically scanning. The officers, once almost hidden, were revealed more distinctly in the interplay of light and shadow. Terror replaced fear in the creature's voice as it let out a blood-curdling scream. It scrambled back on the gargoyle, searching for an escape route. Its desperate movements caused it to lose its footing. Time seemed to slow down as my hand shot out instinctively, a futile gesture against the unfolding nightmare. The creature toppled backward with a horrifying shriek. A shower of shattered, colorful glass rained down as it crashed through the stained glass, tumbling out of the cathedral and on to the sidewalk below. A loud cheer rippled through the crowd outside. Amanda and I exchanged a stunned look, the weight of what we had just witnessed pressing heavily on us. The darkness of the cathedral felt suffocating, filled with unanswered questions. Without wasting a second, we rushed out of the church, straight into the storm of chaos waiting outside. The next thing I remember is kneeling in front of the body. In the harsh daylight, we could finally see it clearly. The man we had nearly killed, in front of an eager, cheering crowd, appeared more like a creature from ancient myth than a human. His unnaturally pale skin seemed to absorb the faint light. Each ragged breath rattled his chest, a grim echo of the fall and the terrors that had driven him there. His hands lay still at his sides, long yellow nails resembling polished claws. But then, something even stranger happened. His skin began to melt and dissolve under the harsh daylight. an impossible transformation unlike anything I'd ever witnessed. His closed eyes snapped open, and his fiery red irises locked on to mine. That's when he clawed at my collar, demanding help. That's when I froze.
Mark.
Despite the exhaustion gnawing at my bones, a primal fear clawed its way up my throat. Sleep deprivation could explain a lot, but the sight before me defied logic. Here I was, a seasoned medic, face to face with a creature straight out of a nightmare. The crowd surged forward, eager and thrilled by the spectacle. A cacophony of gasps and clicks filled the air as 100 phone cameras captured the scene, highlighting a growing voyeuristic trend. In the flickering torchlight, the man, if he could even be called that, writhed on the cobblestones, his tattered clothes barely shielding him from the harsh glare of the sun. My colleague scrambled into action, throwing a blanket over the thrashing figure. The police, ever the professionals, formed a human shield, pushing the eager crowd back. The initial frenzy subsided as they managed to secure the man and get him onto a stretcher. The truth, as it often does, arrived not with fangs and fire, but in the sterile hum of the fluorescent lights at the hospital. Here, the monstrous facade crumbled away, revealing a story far more tragic. The man suffered from albinism, making him hypersensitive to sunlight. Additionally, a cruel twist of fate had cursed him with solar urticaria, a rare condition that turns sunlight into searing agony. His body was a prison, forcing him to seek refuge in the perpetual shadows. Driven to the fringes by his condition, the man had retreated into a world of whispers and flickering candlelight. Isolation had twisted his mind, morphing reality into a grotesque reflection of his suffering. The vampire of St. Michael's wasn't a monster, but a desperate soul lost in the labyrinth of his own illness. He remained an enigma. After being transferred to a specialized facility, his story faded into obscurity. Whether he found solace or succumbed to his condition, I never learned. The case of the St. Michael's vampire lingered, a chilling echo in the silence, a reminder of the monsters that lurk not in the darkness, but in the shadows we cast upon ourselves, and the desperate lengths some go to in order to escape the unbearable.